Steve is Minecraft's main protagonist, but despite being one of the most iconic characters in video game history, very little is known about him. Before Minecraft's creator, Marcus Pearson, otherwise known as Notch, started working on the game, he took part in various game programming contests. These competitions, initiated by Java programmers, was about writing the best possible computer game with a maximum size of 4KB. Due to the nature of the contest, these games were extremely simple, and Notch submitted many. In one of them, called Left 4K Dead, the character walks through a labyrinth of corridors and rooms that are sparsely illuminated by the player's flashlight, where zombies frequently attack you and have to be shot. Notch made a sequel to this called Left 4K Dead 2. The zombies theme appeared to be prevalent throughout Notch's games, and he was planning an improved sequel to the Left 4K Dead series, which he called Zombie Town. Inspired by Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, this time Notch wanted three-dimensional pawns. For the first time in his life, he programmed a completely 3D representation of characters from scratch. He gave them brown hair, a turquoise top, and purple pants, with grey shoes. With Notch having written over 8 games in Java in 4 years at this point, it wasn't surprising that a few months later, he moved on to his next project, Minecraft. Notch realised that the blocky design of these Zombie Town characters would fit well into his new game, and the low texture resolution meant that every player could have a totally unique skin. 3 days into development, he added Zombie Town's characters into Minecraft as mobs, mobile entities, taking not only their models but behaviour from Zombie Town. In Minecraft, these mobs were very simple. They could not change blocks, they would just move around the map aimlessly, walking in slightly imperfected circles and jumping occasionally. However, in the classic edition of the game, which was the second phase of Minecraft's development, Notch planned to introduce a multiplayer mode, which meant looking at other physical characters. Up until this point, you, the player, was, well, nothing. And you didn't need to be because you couldn't physically see yourself. But with the introduction of a multiplayer mode and you needing to see other players, Notch now needed a physical character model, deciding the model of the mobs would become the character. And with this, Steve was born. Well, kind of. He was really nothing more than a skin taken from one of Notch's older games, with no origin story and no name. And that's how it stayed for a while. However, on January the 28th of 2010, in early in-dev versions of the game, a different mob model was added, Rana, with the appearance of a girl in a frog outfit. Rana was designed by Hayden, more commonly known as Doc, who was the first person to join Mojang Studios as the artist of Minecraft, being one of the 3 early testers of the game. And the mob he created, Rana, was exactly that, a character merely used for testing purposes. But he didn't stop there. A few days later, he added 3 more mobs, known as Steve, Black Steve, and Beast Boy. And you will notice the look of these mobs was and is different to the classic style of Minecraft. And that's also probably the reason why they were removed not long after. But as you've just heard me say, these characters had names, but they weren't official. Well, Rana was, but as far as Steve, Black Steve, and Beast Boy goes, neither Notch nor Doc ever mentioned the names of them anywhere. At that time, mobs didn't even have names in the game code during in-dev, and the textures of these mobs were named MCE Export 1, 2, and 3, which means these names couldn't have come from the game itself. So, who named them? And well, scrolling the Minecraft wiki, in May of 2024, somebody posted old IRC chat logs, which was basically a way for the Minecraft community to talk to one another, of the very first time these names were ever mentioned. At 9:49 on January the 29th, Nico Barron said in this chat, new mob models, presumably new player ones. At 9:51, somebody called Bodhi said, new models are great. At 9:57, Doc asked, do you like the skin? The red and green one is the default character. At 10, Doc said, we don't have animation working on the character just yet. As you can see from these mobs at the time, their limbs didn't move. They almost floated around the environment. That's how early on this was. And then at 15:04, somebody said, so I'm not the only one that thinks Black Steve, asterisk, is pantless. And then somebody else replied, Black Steve has now been coined. That is our new buddy's name. And from then on, it took off. A few minutes later, White Steve was then named by the community, and Beast Boy already kind of had his name because, well, he looks like the character Beast Boy. This conversation between the early Minecraft community officially decided the names of these early mobs: Beast Boy, Black Steve, and White Steve. And well, you may notice the discrepancy there. They commonly switched White Steve with just Steve. In the absence of any known official name for these mobs, these three had now been adopted by the wider community. So if this was Steve, then how did the default character that we know today become Steve? At the time, in early 2010, he was still nameless. Well, as I said earlier, shortly after their introduction, these mobs were removed from the game, more than likely due to their different style. So for a while, the Steve model we know today was still referred to as the mob. That was until the release of the game Super Meat Boy on the 20th of October 2010, where he would be included as an unlockable character on its PC version a month later in November, referred to as Mr. Minecraft. But before the PC version's release, on Notch's Tumblr, he wrote, "Super Meat Boy is a frustrating platformer based around being amazing. You play an extremely fragile chunk of meat, wall sliding, sprinting and jumping across a scary large amount of levels. The level design is amazingly perfect, and the game is filled with homages to other games. You will die a lot though. Fun fact, the Minecraft guy, brackets, Steve, question mark, might make it in as an unlockable character in the PC version." This was the first time the creator of the game had officially mentioned Steve. And it's interesting how he uses the question mark, because you could take it as him asking a question, is he called Steve? Or you could take it as a confirmation, him going along with the fact that the community seems to have coined this name. And even though it didn't specifically refer to this mob model, these were White and Black Steve. Now that they were gone, it seemed that Notch was continuing to go along with the name Steve. And that was it. By the time the Bedrock edition of Minecraft was released, his name was official, releasing on merchandise and in the main menu. Steve was still a pretty empty character. Besides from a name, he had no lore, no secret in-game storyline, because he was never meant to. He isn't written into the game's world history. This isn't missing lore, it's a design choice. From the beginning, Minecraft was built as a sandbox, not a story-driven game. The focus was never on who the player is, but on what the player does. Steve exists to represent the player's position in the world, nothing more. His appearance wasn't designed for personality or storytelling, it was designed for function. Minecraft's world is made of cubes, so Steve was built out of cubes too. His proportions made collision detection easier, animation simpler, and gameplay clearer. His clothing, a light blue shirt and blue pants, stood out against most environments without drawing attention to itself. Even his face is neutral. Steve doesn't smile, he doesn't frown, he doesn't react, because the moment he does, he stops becoming neutral. That was the reason why he wasn't initially given a name by Notch, but as Minecraft grew in popularity, I guess it was inevitable. And Steve became Steve through community usage, not narrative design. Compared to other video game characters, every single action Steve performs comes directly from player input. Without a player, Steve does nothing. And even though he can do things that seem impossible, he can carry massive amounts of material, survive extreme damage, respawn after death, these abilities are often interpreted as lore, but they aren't. They are game mechanics. Minecraft is designed around creativity and experimentation. Limiting the player too heavily would restrict that freedom, so Steve is given abilities that support long-term play. Death isn't a story moment in Minecraft, it's a reset button. And for years, Steve was the only default character. But in 2014, Mojang introduced Alex as a second option. Alex wasn't added to replace Steve or expand the lore, she was added to give players more representation and avoid assumptions about who Steve was. Importantly, Alex had no backstory, meaning both of them are equally canon and equally undefined. Steve isn't a mystery waiting to be solved. He isn't a forgotten hero, he isn't hiding a secret past. Steve is a design solution. He exists to give players freedom, not direction. That's why, after more than a decade, Steve remains iconic. Not because of who he is, but because of what players do through him. Steve was designed as a tool, not a hero, and that design choice is why Minecraft works.